Hello. I always thought betrayal would come with some grand revelation, catching them in the act, some whispered confession, or a dramatic text message left open on the wrong screen. But no, it came in the form of a missing anniversary card. 5 years. 5 years of marriage, 10 years together. I wasn't the sentimental type, but she was. Every year, without fail, she would leave a handwritten card on my bedside table. It was her thing, her way of expressing love in poetic lines and thoughtful scribbles. This year? Nothing. No card. No kiss in the morning. Just a hurried "see you later" as she rushed off to work. That was the first red flag. The second came when I checked her car's mileage. Call me paranoid, call me obsessive, but I've always believed in numbers. Numbers don't lie. Her usual commute? Exactly 14.2 miles round trip. That day? 27.4 miles. I checked again the next day. 29.1 miles. The day after? 31.7. She wasn't just taking a scenic route home. She was going somewhere, to someone. Now, I could have confronted her. Could have blown up, accused, demanded answers. But why waste energy on words when actions are so much more powerful? Instead of arguing, I planned. And while she was busy sneaking around, I was preparing the grand finale. The tipping point came 2 weeks later when she made the mistake of leaving her phone on the kitchen counter, unlocked. 5 missed calls from him. Some idiot named Ryan. Curious, I opened their messages. Oh, and wasn't that a treat? Lines dripping with stolen passion, desperate longing, promises of a future together. Can't wait to finally be with you. That's what he wrote. Finally. As if she was some trapped princess in a tower and not a married woman with a husband who had given her everything. I didn't react. Didn't break anything. Didn't even bother to wake her up from her fake exhaustion-induced sleep on the couch. Instead, I calmly forwarded every single message, photo, and video to my own phone. Then, I deleted the evidence from her device. Let her think she was still in control. The next morning, she woke up to coffee and breakfast as if nothing had changed. She kissed me on the cheek, muttered something about a meeting after work. I smiled, nodded, even held the door open for her. The moment she was out of sight, I got to work. See, I wasn't just planning revenge. I was planning a lesson. The kind that sticks. The kind that echoes for years. Because while she had thrown away our marriage like last year's fashion, I wasn't about to let her walk away unscathed. And I knew exactly when and where to strike. Our son's graduation. She was already gushing about it weeks in advance. How proud she was. How much it meant to her. How she couldn't wait to see him walk across that stage. That was her moment. And that was precisely why I was going to ruin it. I spent the next few days tightening the noose around her illusion of security. Acting normal. Playing the doting husband. Making sure she never suspected a thing. Meanwhile, I got in touch with our son. Told him everything. No sugarcoating, no dramatics, just the truth. He took it in with a quiet nod, his jaw tightening the way mine had when I first found out. Like father, like son. And then, we made a plan. A simple one. Elegant. Devastating. See, our son had been chosen to give a speech at the graduation ceremony. A speech about perseverance, family, and the people who had supported him throughout his journey. His mother had been looking forward to that speech more than anything. She thought he would stand up there and praise her. Thank her for being such a devoted mother. She had no idea that he was about to expose her instead. The days leading up to the event were almost comical. She was glowing, talking about how excited she was, how much she loved our family, how this was one of the best moments of her life. I smiled, played along. Inside, I was counting down the hours. The night before the graduation, she cuddled up next to me in bed and whispered, "I love you." I almost laughed. The audacity. The sheer, shameless hypocrisy of it. Instead, I whispered back, "I know." And the next day, she walked into that ceremony completely unaware that her perfect little world was about to shatter in front of hundreds of people. They say betrayal doesn't come out of nowhere. That if you look back, the signs were always there, small, almost imperceptible cracks in what you thought was a solid foundation. But in the moment, when you're living it, everything just feels normal. Our life wasn't a fairy tale, but it was good. Stable. We had our routines, our little traditions. Sunday mornings were for pancakes. She always wanted hers with blueberries. I stuck to plain. She loved watching those reality home makeover shows, swearing one day we'd remodel our kitchen. I humored her, pretending to care about backsplash designs and open shelving. Evenings were quiet, predictable, dinner at the table, her scrolling through her phone while I half-watched whatever show we'd started and never finished. It was comfortable. We weren't the kind of couple that clung to each other every second, but we had our moments. She'd sneak up behind me while I was shaving, wrap her arms around my waist, and press her face against my back. "Don't ever grow a beard," she'd joke, running her fingers over my jaw. "I married you clean-shaven, and that's how I like you." I used to think that was cute. Now I wonder if it was just her way of making sure I never changed, never became someone who might start noticing things. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment when things started shifting. It wasn't loud. There was no big fight, no dramatic change. It was subtle, creeping in like a slow leak. She started working later. At first, it was once or twice a week. Then it became a pattern. Deadlines, she said. Meetings ran over. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She wasn't some stranger. She was my wife. Then came the phone habits. We used to leave our phones on the counter at night, charging side by side. But suddenly, hers was always face down. Always within reach. She'd take it with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. I teased her about it once, joking that she was turning into one of those people addicted to scrolling. She just laughed it off. Said she was keeping up with work. I let it go. There were other things, 2 things that didn't scream affair, but felt off. Like the way she'd get dressed up more often, even for mundane errands. The perfume she suddenly started wearing every day, one she hadn't used in years. The way she'd hum to herself, completely lost in thought, then snap back to reality if she caught me watching. But the biggest sign? The silence. For most of our marriage, she'd talk. About everything. About her day, about office gossip, about what she wanted to do that weekend. And I'd listen, nodding along, half engaged but present. But then, the talking stopped. Or rather, she still spoke, but she stopped saying anything real. "How was your day?" I'd ask. "Fine," she'd say. Always fine. She'd give me surface-level updates, what she had for lunch, how annoying the traffic was, but nothing deeper. No rants about coworkers, no frustrations, no little stories. It was like she had a whole other life somewhere else, when I wasn't allowed into. And still, I ignored it. Because this was my wife. Because we had history. Because I never thought she was capable of doing what she did. The worst part is, I wasn't even unhappy. Not really. Sure, things had shifted, but relationships evolve. I figured maybe we were in a rut, that this was just a phase. I told myself she was stressed, that work was demanding, that I just needed to be patient. And so, I kept doing what I'd always done, showing up, being steady, being the man she married. Our son, on the other hand, noticed things before I did. He was always more perceptive. It's funny, because you never think about how much your kids see. You assume they're caught up in their own world, too focused on their friends, their phones, their next big milestone. But they watch. They feel the shifts in the air. And at some point, he must have realized something wasn't right. "Dad," he said one night, as we sat in the living room. She had gone to bed early, another habit that had started recently. "Do you ever feel like Mom is different?" I looked up from my laptop, thrown off by the question. "Different how?" He hesitated. "I don't know. Just not as present. It's like she's here, but she's not here." I frowned, but I still didn't see it. Or maybe I just didn't want to. "She's been busy with work," I said, giving him the same excuse I had given myself. He didn't look convinced. But he didn't push either. Maybe he thought I already knew. Maybe, in a way, I did. But knowing something deep down and admitting it to yourself are 2 very different things. And so, I kept ignoring it. I kept pretending everything was fine. Until the missing anniversary card. Until the mileage. Until the messages. Until finally, I saw everything for what it was. And once I did, I wasn't sad. I wasn't heartbroken. I was ready. It started with a name. Nothing dramatic, just a name I had never heard before, slipping from her lips like an afterthought. I was standing at the sink, rinsing a plate, half listening as she moved around the kitchen. She was talking about her day, her words casual, effortless. Something about a meeting, a late lunch, a funny conversation in the office. And then, she said it, Ryan. It wasn't a name that belonged in our world. I knew her colleagues, her friends, the people she spent time with. There was no Ryan. My hands stilled under the running water. I didn't turn around right away. I wanted to hear what came next. But she kept talking, smooth and natural, like the name didn't mean anything. Maybe, to her, it didn't. Maybe I was just being paranoid. So, I let it go. For that moment. Later that night, I casually asked, "Who's Ryan?" Her reaction was a second too slow. A tiny, almost imperceptible beat before she answered. "Oh, Just a new guy at work. Transferred in last month. Why? That pause. That hesitation. That was all I needed to hear. Just curious, I said, keeping my face neutral. You mentioned him earlier. She waved it off. Oh, yeah, I guess. We were all at lunch, and he told this ridiculous story. You would have laughed. That was it. She turned back to her book, end of discussion. But something in me stayed alert. Why hadn't I heard about him before? She used to tell me about new coworkers all the time. Who was annoying, who was funny, who she liked, who she didn't. But this name had never come up until now. And something about the way she brushed it off felt too easy, too rehearsed. I didn't push. I didn't ask again. Instead, I started paying closer attention. Over the next few days, I noticed small shifts. Not dramatic, not obvious, but enough to make my instincts sharpen. Her phone, for one. She had always been relaxed about it, leaving it face up, sometimes even asking me to check a notification for her if she was cooking or busy. But now, it was always face down, always within reach. At night, instead of leaving it on the charger by the bed, she took it with her to the bathroom. When she came back, she would place it carefully on her nightstand, screen tilted away. I tested it once. Picked it up casually while she was in the shower, pretending to check the time. Immediately, the lock screen lit up. A notification flashed before disappearing almost instantly. New message from Ryan. I put the phone down. That was all I needed. Another thing, the way she dressed. My wife had always been effortlessly beautiful, but she never put much thought into daily outfits unless it was for something special. But now, she was dressing up for work. Not just nice, intentional. Fitted blouses, extra time on her hair, perfume I hadn't smelled in years. She even started wearing lingerie again. Not for me, though. No, she was coming home already wearing it. That's when the pieces started clicking together. One night, as she sat curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, I tested something. Hey, I said casually, I was thinking we could do a weekend trip soon. Just us. Maybe that cabin we liked. She barely looked up. Maybe. Things are so crazy at work right now, though. I nodded. Too crazy for a weekend? She hesitated. Just for a second. Yeah, just for now. That was the moment I knew. Because we used to love those trips. We used to plan them months in advance, look forward to them. And now? Now, she couldn't even pretend to be excited. But I still didn't confront her. No, that would have been too easy. Confrontation would have given her time to lie, to spin a story, to convince me I was imagining things. Instead, I played the waiting game. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind working like a machine. If she was cheating, she was comfortable, which meant she wasn't being as careful as she should be. And if she wasn't being careful, she would slip up. So, I let her believe I was clueless. Let her think she was getting away with it. And all the while, I was watching. Waiting. Because if she thought she was in control, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. A liar's greatest weakness is their belief that they are smarter than the person they are deceiving, and my wife was no different. She thought she was clever, thought she was careful, but she didn't realize that the moment she gave me a reason to doubt her was the moment I stopped. Trusting anything she said, every word, every action, every excuse became data points for me to analyze, and I was patient. I let her think she was winning while I was quietly taking everything apart piece by piece. The first thing I noticed was the passwords. We had always shared them, not in some obsessive controlling way, but in a natural we have nothing to hide way. I knew her phone code, she knew mine. We both had access to our shared streaming accounts, our bank apps, our cloud storage, but suddenly she had changed hers. She hadn't told me, hadn't mentioned it at all. I only realized when I went to use her laptop to check an old email and the login screen asked for a password it had never asked for before. I played dumb, asked her casually, hey, did you change your laptop password? She barely looked up from her phone. Yeah, IT made us update them for security standard procedure. Oh yeah, I asked, does that include your phone too? Because it doesn't recognize my Face ID anymore. She hesitated just for a fraction of a second before laughing. Oh yeah, that one too, it reset when I updated it. Funny, right? Yeah, hilarious. I smiled and left it at that, but inside I was already putting a checkmark next to another lie. Then came the location. She had always been predictable. She had routines: work, gym, grocery store, home. Sometimes she met up with friends, but that was always planned, always mentioned. Now there were gaps, inconsistencies, little things that didn't make sense. She'd say she was working late, but the office lights tracker on our security app showed that the building was dark. She'd say she was grabbing dinner with a friend, but when I casually asked that friend about their night, she'd blink in confusion and say, oh no, we haven't seen each other in weeks. The worst part was how good she thought she was at it, how easily she could lie to my face and assume I wouldn't question it. She had no idea I had started checking mileage again, logging times, comparing receipts. She had no idea that when she claimed to be at a certain place, I would verify it quietly without a word. She had no idea that I had installed a secondary backup in our cloud storage months ago. Something she thought was deleted was actually still accessible to me, and what a treasure trove it was. The first time I saw the messages, I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just confirmation. She and Ryan had gotten bold, no longer just work-related small talk, but inside jokes, shared frustrations, little affectionate remarks. She called him babe, he called her my girl. It was also sickeningly predictable, but predictable was good. Predictable meant I could anticipate their mistakes, and mistakes were what would bring them down. She started reacting strangely to simple things, like if I asked what time she'd be home, her response wasn't a normal answer. It was overly detailed, defensive, like she was preemptively covering for something. Oh, I have to stay late, but only for an hour, maybe an hour and 15, and then I'll stop for gas because the tank is low, and I might grab a coffee before heading back home because I'm feeling a little tired. Why so much information? Why was she explaining herself before I had even questioned her? I just nodded. Sure, sounds good, be safe. She had no idea that I was already outside, sitting in my car, watching as she left the office in exactly 5 minutes, not an hour 15, straight out the door to the parking lot and into her car. But she didn't go to a gas station, and she definitely didn't stop for coffee. She drove straight across town to a small hotel, one of those anonymous-looking places, the kind meant for quick, discreet visits. She pulled into the parking lot, and less than 2 minutes later, another car pulled in right next to hers. I watched as a man got out, walked straight to her door, and slid in like he belonged there. I didn't need to see more. I had all the proof I needed, but this wasn't about proof anymore. This was about the game. I wasn't just going to catch her. I was going to outplay her. She thought she was being clever, thought she was in control, but she had no idea that she had just become a pawn in a game she didn't even know was being played. I didn't confront her, didn't call her out, didn't demand answers. I just let it keep going, let her dig herself deeper. Every kiss, every text, every whispered conversation she thought was a secret was another thread in the web I was weaving around her, and soon, very soon, she was going to realize that she was the one caught in it, not me. The truth didn't hit me like a hammer. It didn't explode in my face. It crept in slow, deliberate, a whisper in the dark before it became a roar. I had already known, already suspected, already seen the signs, but suspicion and confirma tie-in are two very different things. Suspicion keeps you in the realm of doubt, but confirmation pulls you into reality, and reality is cruel, unforgiving, surgical in its precision. Reality doesn't care about love or history or the life you thought you had built. Reality just is, and mine arrived in the form of a single undeniable piece of proof, a video. I had been gathering evidence, slowly, methodically piecing together her lies with the patience of a man who wasn't just looking for answers, but for justice. But nothing prepared me for the brutality of seeing it with my own eyes. The camera I had placed in her car was small, nearly invisible, nestled perfectly in the seam between the dashboard and the windshield, a last-minute decision on my part, because deep down I knew she wasn't just texting, she wasn't just lying, she was using our car, my car, for him. The footage was clear, painfully clear. She was in the driver's seat, parked in a secluded lot, engine off, windows slightly fogged up, and then the passenger door opened, and in he climbed, Ryan, tall, smirking, sliding in like he belonged there, his hand on her thigh, her lips on his, their bodies moving too familiar, too easy. Like this wasn't the first time, like this was routine. She laughed low, sultry, whispered something in his ear, and he grinned, whispered something back, their hands roaming her wedding ring flashing under the dim streetlight as she touched him the same way she used to touch me. And that was it. No more guessing, no more paranoia, and no more thinking maybe I was wrong there. It was in pixelated high-definition betrayal in motion. I felt nothing at first, not immediately. The silence inside me was so complete, so hollow, that I almost mistook it for calm. But then a slow, cold fire began to spread beneath my skin, not rage, not sorrow, something deeper, something sharper, not an urge to scream, but an urge to act. The difference between a man caught in a storm and a man who becomes the storm. I rewound the footage, watched it again and again, not to torture myself, but to analyze every detail, her expressions, her body language, the way she gripped his shirt like she needed him, the same way she used to need me, the way she checked the rearview mirror afterward, making sure she wasn't caught, the way she adjusted herself before coming home to me. And then the part that nearly made me laugh, if anything about this was funny, the way they parted. He kissed her one last time, smirked, and said soon. And she nodded, breathless, flushed eyes half lidded, and whispered back soon, as if this was some great love story. and not two pathetic liars tangled in deceit. I closed the laptop, exhaled slowly, hands steady, no shaking, no panic, just clarity, because now I wasn't a man who had been cheated on, I wasn't a husband with a broken heart, I was a man with a plan. She thought she was in control, thought she was getting away with it, thought she was playing me for a fool, but she had no idea that she had been walking straight into a trap. Every lie she had told, every sneaky text, every lingering glance at her phone, when she thought I wasn't looking, had been nothing more than rope. I had let her tangle around her own neck, and now it was time to tighten it. I didn't confront her that night, didn't demand answers, didn't rage, didn't throw accusations at her feet, like some desperate man begging for the truth. She would only lie, she would only deny, and I wasn't interested in words. Words were weak. Instead, I kissed her on the forehead as she slept, curled up on her side the same way she had curled up in his arms just hours before, and whispered a promise, not of forgiveness, not of understanding, but of something she would never see coming, because she had chosen the wrong man to betray, and by the time she realized it, by the time she saw the full extent of what I had planned, it would already be too late. Revenge isn't about anger, it isn't about chaos or screaming or throwing things, it's about control, precision, execution. It's about knowing exactly where to hit, and when to hit. It's about watching your enemy walk blindly into their own downfall. And my wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, had made one fatal mistake. She had given me time. She thought she was safe. She thought she was playing a game where she held all the cards. She thought she was balancing two lives perfectly, but what she didn't know was that I had already started rewriting the rules. I knew her weaknesses, knew what mattered to her, what she feared, what she couldn't afford to lose, and I wasn't interested in petty revenge and screaming matches and throwing her stuff on the lawn like some emotional wreck. No, I wanted something deeper, something permanent. She loved her image more than anything, the devoted mother, the supportive wife, the woman who had built a family she could be proud of. She cared about appearances, about how people saw her. She cared about being admired, being respected, being loved. And so that's exactly where I was going to strike, because the best revenge isn't destruction, it's exposure. Letting the world see someone for who they really are, stripping away every carefully curated lie, and leaving them standing in front of the wreckage of their own making with nowhere to hide. Our son was graduating soon. She had been talking about it for months, planning the perfect celebration, beaming with pride about how she had raised such an incredible young man, how much this moment meant to her. She wanted to be the proud mother in the front row, wiping away tears as he gave his speech. She wanted to be the center of that moment, basking in the glow of her perfect little family. And that was the exact moment I was going to take away from her, because she didn't deserve it. She didn't deserve to sit there and pretend she had built something worth celebrating while sneaking off to cheap hotel rooms with another man. She didn't deserve to be honored in our son's milestone when she had been dishonoring our family for months. So I sat him down, looked him in the eyes, and told him everything. No sugarcoating, no protecting her image, no sparing her from the consequences of her own actions. I showed him the messages, the footage, the undeniable truth. I let him see her not as his mother, but as the woman who had betrayed our family. And when I was done, I didn't ask him for forgiveness for not telling him sooner. I didn't tell him how to feel. I just asked him one thing: what do you want to do about it? He didn't hesitate. He didn't cry. He didn't even look surprised. He just exhaled like something heavy had finally been set down and said, I want her to know that I know. And just like that, the plan was set. He was giving a speech at graduation, a speech about perseverance, family support, and the people who had shaped his journey. She was expecting to be praised, to be honored, to have her moment in the spotlight, but what she was actually going to get was the truth. I spent the next few weeks watching her act like everything was normal, playing her role perfectly, kissing me in the morning, texting me during the day, curling up next to me at night, all while sneaking around with him. And I let her, because the deeper she fell into her illusion of security, the harder the fall would be when it all shattered around her. She didn't suspect a thing, didn't notice how I had started pulling away little by little, how I had stopped making future plans, how I was letting her talk without really engaging. She was too wrapped up in her own selfish little world to realize that the ground beneath her was already crumbling. The night before graduation, she lay beside me, scrolling through her phone, probably texting him, making plans for their next rendezvous, and she sighed happily, resting her head against my shoulder, whispering, I love you. I didn't say it back, didn't react, just let the silence stretch between us until she fell asleep, and I lay there in the dark staring at the ceiling, counting down the hours until she would wake up and step into her worst nightmare, because tomorrow the world was going to see her for exactly what she was, and there wasn't a single thing she could do to stop it. Graduation day arrived bright and perfect, the way these moments are supposed to be, a day of celebration, of pride, of families coming together to honor their children's achievements. The sun was shining, the air was warm, everything about it screamed picture perfect, but Underneath the surface, beneath the polished smiles and proud speeches, there was a storm brewing, and she had no idea she was standing directly in its path. She woke up excited, buzzing around the house, making sure everything was perfect: her dress, her hair, the little speech she had planned to give at the after-party, where she would talk about how proud she was of our son, of our family, of everything we had built together. She had no idea that in just a few hours all of that was going to burn. I played my role flawlessly, smiling, nodding, even letting her hold my hand on the drive to the ceremony. She kept squeezing it as if she were the proud, devoted wife, as if she weren't sneaking off in the middle of the day to meet another man, as if she weren't sending "I miss you" texts to him while sitting next to me on the couch. I wondered if she could feel my pulse steady and calm beneath her fingers, if she could sense that something was off, if she had any inkling that this was the last day she would ever feel in control. The auditorium was packed. Families filled the rows, dressed in their best, cameras ready, programs in hand. Her eyes shone with pride as she looked up at the stage where our son would soon stand, and I watched her, watching him, wondering if she had even earned the right to feel that pride, if she had any guilt at all, or if she had convinced herself that she deserved this moment. And then it began. One by one, students walked across the stage, receiving their diplomas, applause, cheers, everything as expected, until it was time for the speech she had been waiting for, the one she had envisioned as a tribute to her, to all her sacrifices. Love and support. Our son stepped up to the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, his hands steady, his voice clear, and then he began. At first it sounded like a typical speech. He thanked the school, the teachers, his friends. But then he shifted his tone just slightly, enough that only those really listening would notice. His words became sharper, more deliberate. He spoke about role models, about the people who shape us, about how trust is something that should never be taken for granted. And as he spoke, I saw her sit up straighter, her smile faltering just a little, as if some part of her was beginning to sense what was coming. And then the words that cut through the air like a blade. But sometimes the people who are supposed to guide us, the people who are supposed to protect us and love us, are the same people who betray us behind closed doors. They smile in public, they play the role, they say they love you, but their love is a lie. They teach you to believe in things they don't even believe in themselves. The room shifted, a ripple of confusion, parents glancing at each other, some leaning in to listen closer. She went rigid, her hands gripping the program so tightly her knuckles turned white, her breathing shallow, as if she were suddenly trapped and had nowhere to run. And then the final blow. To those people, I just want to say one thing: we see you, we know who you really are. You can lie to the world, but you can't lie to the people who know you best, and sooner or later the truth always comes out. Silence, thick, heavy, suffocating. She sat frozen, staring at our son, as if he had just driven a knife straight through her chest. And in a way, he had just taken the moment she had been waiting for and turned it into a reckoning. There was no clapping now, just hushed whispers, people looking around, trying to piece together what they had just heard, the weight of his words sinking in. And then she turned to me, her face pale, her eyes wide, desperate, searching mine for some kind of explanation, some reassurance that this wasn't what she thought it was, that somehow she could still fix this. But I just stared back at her, calm, collected, watching as the realization finally hit, that she wasn't just exposed, she was powerless. And that was the beauty of it. She couldn't scream, couldn't deny, couldn't storm out without confirming to everyone exactly who she was. She had to sit there and endure it, every second, every whisper, every knowing glance. She had to feel it crawl under her skin the way her betrayal had crawled under mine. By the time the ceremony ended, she looked like a ghost, her hands trembling as she tried to smile, tried to act as if nothing was wrong. But it was too late. The damage was done. And the worst part for her was that this was just the beginning, because the moment we stepped outside into the crowd, into the dozens of people who had heard every word, the real consequences would begin, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She was already unraveling before we even stepped outside, her hands clutching at the program like it was some kind of lifeline, her breathing shallow, her eyes darting around the room, trying to gauge the damage, trying to see who had understood, who had connected the dots. But she knew that the whispers were growing, that the stolen glances in her direction were no longer friendly, no longer admiring. She had spent so long crafting the perfect image, the devoted wife, the loving mother, the woman who had it all, and now in a matter of minutes it had been torn apart in front of an audience she had wanted to impress more than anything. I stayed quiet, watching as the realization sank deeper into her bones. She was trapped, no way to explain it away, no way to laugh it off, no way to pretend she wasn't the subject of the speech that everyone was now dissecting as they filed out of their seats outside. She tried to pull me aside, her grip on my arm tight, desperate, her voice low and shaking. "We need to talk," she whispered, But I just looked at her, a calm, empty look, the kind that made it clear I was in no rush, no hurry to ease her panic. Talk about what I said, watching as her throat bobbed, her lips parted and closed again as she tried to come up with something, anything. But she had nothing. She was a woman who had built her world on deception, and now that the foundation had been ripped away, she had no idea how to stand. Please, let's just go home, she tried again. But home wasn't an option, not for her, not anymore. We're celebrating, I said. Our son just graduated. Isn't that what you wanted? To spend the day with family and friends, to be surrounded by the people who matter to us. She swallowed hard, her fingers twitching as more people moved around us, some stopping to say congratulations to our son, others looking at her, looking at me, waiting. And then it happened, the first blow to the fragile wall she was trying to keep up. One of the other parents, a woman she had known for years, leaned in with a too polite smile, her voice dripping with some tea. And that wasn't quite sympathy, so that was quite a speech, she said, tilting her head. And what was it he said again about people who lie to the world but can't lie to those who know them best? Must have been hard to hear something like that being said so publicly. My wife's face drained of color, her smile forced, cracking at the edges. She let out a short, unnatural laugh. Oh, you know, kids these days, so dramatic. She tried to brush it off, but the woman wasn't done. Her smile never wavered, but her eyes were sharp, cold. I just think it's brave, she said, her voice soft and measured, speaking the truth in front of so many people, not easy to do. It was then that I saw, at the exact moment my wife realized she wasn't just embarrassed, she was cornered, because the whispers were spreading, because there was no fixing this, no cleaning it up, no spinning a story to cover the cracks, because the people she had wanted to impress had already made their judgment. More voices joined, and not loud, not accusatory, just curious, polite questions wrapped in the sharp edge of quiet condemnation. What do you think he meant by that speech? Must have been shocking to hear something like that from your own son. I'm sure it's nothing, but I just have to ask, is everything all right at home? She looked at me, then panic rising behind her eyes, pleading, but I just met her gaze with an almost bored expression, as if I was watching a predictable movie unfold exactly as I had expected. She was alone, and she knew it, and the more she stammered, the more she tried to act like she had control, the more obvious it became that she didn't. And then came the final blow. Our son stepped up beside me, his face unreadable, his voice calm but firm. I'm going with Dad, he said simply. No anger, no theatrics, just a quiet declaration. And my wife turned to him, her breath catching. What do you mean? She tried to smile, but it was crumbling fast. Come on, let's go home, we can talk about this. But he shook his head. There's nothing to talk about. And that was it. That was the moment she broke, because she had already lost her reputation, already lost her carefully built image. But this was the one thing she had never considered, that she would lose him too. She tried again, reaching for him. Please don't do this. He pulled back just enough, his face still calm, still controlled. I didn't do anything, he said simply. You did. I could see it. Then the full weight of her own actions crashing down on her, the way she suddenly seemed small, standing there surrounded by people who were watching and judging and whispering, the way her shoulders slumped as she finally understood that this wasn't something she could talk her way out of, that she wasn't in control, that she had never been in control. And then I turned to her, voice low, and even the way hers had been when she had lied so easily to my face for months. See you around, I said with a slight nod. Then I turned and walked away, feeling nothing but satisfaction as the silence behind me stretched long and heavy, swallowing her whole. The fallout was immediate and brutal, not because I had to do anything, but because once the truth is out, it spreads like wildfire, and there is no stopping it. She had spent years crafting an image of herself as the perfect wife, the devoted mother, the woman who had it all, and in a single day it had been reduced to nothing but whispers and judgment and cold, knowing glances. She had always loved being the center of attention, basking in admiration, but now the only looks she received were filled with curiosity and quiet disgust. People talk, they always do, and in a community like ours, where reputations matter, where the perfect family image is everything, the scandal was a feast. The graduation speech was only the spark, but the real fire came afterward, when the rumors started twisting into undeniable facts, when people started piecing things together, when wives started whispering to their husbands, did you hear, did you know, can you believe it? And suddenly the invitation stopped, suddenly the texts went unanswered, suddenly the friends she had once relied on were too busy, too distant, too uninterested. She tried to reach out. At first I ignored most of it, but I kept the messages, not because I needed them, but because they were proof of just how quickly her world had crumbled. First came the denial. We need to talk. This is a misunderstanding. Please just let me explain. Then came the bargaining. We can fix this. I made a mistake, but we can work through it for our son, for our family. After that, desperation. Please don't do this. Don't take everything from me. I can't lose you. I can't lose him. And then finally anger, because when a person realizes they've lost everything, they lash out. Fine, if this is what you want, then I hope you're happy. But the truth is, she didn't hope for anything. She just didn't know how to exist without control. Ryan disappeared almost instantly the moment she became toxic, the moment people started looking at her with pity instead of admiration. He was gone. He wasn't going to ruin his own reputation, his own career for a woman who no longer had anything to offer him. She had thrown away a marriage for him, and in the end he didn't even stick around to pick up the pieces. She was alone, truly and completely alone, and that was something she had never prepared for. Divorce was swift, brutal, efficient. I had been planning it long before the public exposure, making sure every asset was accounted for, making sure she wouldn't walk away with anything more than she deserved, which was very little. Our home was mine, my finances secured. Our son made it clear he wanted to stay with me, and given everything that had come out, she didn't have a leg to stand on. The moment she realized just how little power she had left was almost too easy to predict. She tried to argue, to fight, to demand, but every attempt just exposed her more and more until finally she just signed the papers in silence. She lost the house, lost the respect of the people around her, lost the one thing she had always relied on, her ability to manipulate the world into giving her exactly what she wanted. She moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, no longer the woman who hosted dinner parties and charity events, now just another name that people spoke about in hushed tones when she walked into a room. Work wasn't much better. She had built her career on trust, on connections, and when those connections started pulling away, so did her opportunities. The promotion stopped, the invitations to high-profile meetings disappeared. She wasn't fired, but she might as well have been, because without the influence, without the image she had worked so hard to build, she was nothing but a reminder of a scandal no company wanted that attached to them. As for me, I thrived not just because I had removed her from my life, but because I had walked away with everything intact. I had my dignity, my son, my future. She had thought she was playing a game where she held the upper hand, but she had underestimated me. Underestimated just how much I was willing to wait and watch and strike when the time was right. She had thought I would beg, would crumble, would try to fix things, but instead I had erased her, and she knew it. She knew it every time she saw me moving forward while she was stuck in the wreckage of her own making. The last time she reached out, it was months later, a simple message, one that almost made me laugh. "Do you ever think about what we had? Do you ever miss me?" I didn't even bother responding because the truth was I had already forgotten what it felt like to care about her. The moment she made her choices, she had ceased to matter, and that was the final punishment. Not the divorce, not the loss of friends, not even the social exile. It was knowing that she had become irrelevant, that the man who once would have done anything for her now saw her as nothing more than a mistake to be left behind. Life has a way of balancing itself out. Some people call it karma, some call it justice, but in the end it's simple: choices and consequences. My wife made her choices thinking she could control the outcome, thinking she could live two lives without consequence. But the truth is, no one ever really gets away with betrayal, not forever. The damage always comes back around, and when it does, it's never on their terms. She learned that the hard way, watching as everything she thought was permanent slipped through her fingers, realizing too late that the person she had taken for granted was the same person who held the power to dismantle her world brick by brick. Sometimes I wonder if she fully understands the weight of what she lost. Not just me, not just our son, not just the house or the lifestyle, but the version of herself that once existed before she decided that fleeting excitement was worth more than the life we had built together. I wonder if she regrets it, if she lies awake in that small apartment replaying every moment, realizing that there is no going back, no fixing, no second chances. But then I remind myself that it doesn't really matter. Her regrets, her suffering, her downfall, none of it changes the fact that I am free, and she is nothing but a cautionary tale, a whispered reminder in social circles of what happens when you gamble everything and lose. People ask me if I got closure, if I feel satisfied with how things ended, if I ever think about forgiving her, and the truth is, closure isn't something she could ever give me, because she never had power over me to begin with. The moment I saw the truth, the moment I realized that I was never going to be the weak, devastated husband she expected me to be, was the moment I had already won. Forgiveness is something people give when they need to heal, when they need to move on, but I didn't need her to give me anything. I had already taken back everything that mattered. There is a kind of peace that comes with knowing you handled something exactly the way it needed to be handled, not out of anger, not out of desperation, but out of straw. Teggy patience, intelligence. She thought she was smart, she thought she was playing a game, but she never saw the real player standing right beside her, watching, waiting, knowing that her arrogance would be her downfall, and that when it was time to strike there would be no escape, no excuses, no room for manipulation. I never raised my voice, never begged, never fought for something that wasn't worth saving, and in the end, that was the worst punishment of all, because people like her, they expect chaos, they expect dramatic fights, they expect to be at the center of some tragic love story where the betrayed spouse is broken, but still hopelessly in love. They don't expect to be dismissed, discarded, erased. They don't expect to become irrelevant. And that's what she is now, irrelevant to me, to our son, to the people who once respected her. She exists in a space she never thought she would be, alone with her choices, alone with the consequences, no one to blame, no one to fix it for her, no way to rewrite the past into something that absolves her of responsibility. She wanted freedom, but freedom isn't always what people think it is. Sometimes freedom is just emptiness, the realization that you burned everything down and now you have to sit in the ashes with no one left to pull you out. So here's my question for you: if you were in my place, if you saw the truth as I did, if you had the chance to strike back, not with rage, but with precision, not with emotion, but with absolute control, would you do it? Would you let them walk away with no consequences? Or would you watch them crumble under the weight of their own deception? Would you be the fool who forgives or the strategist who wins? Tell me what you would do, because in the end, betrayal isn't just about what they did to you, it's about how you choose to answer. Bye-bye.